Mitos NBA que todos pensábamos que eran ciertos. Vamos a ver este vídeo de mi gran amigo Jimmy High Roller. Vamos a reaccionar, bienvenidos un día más al canal, por supuesto. Todo el mundo suscrito ya con todas las notificaciones. Y deja tu like, por supuestísimo. Ya sabes, contenido prácticamente diario. O bueno, día cada 2 días, pero diario. Y vamos a ver qué tal, porque ya solo veo a Michael Jordan y ya tengo ganas de verlo. Vamos allá.
A rookie Michael Jordan entered the NBA Slam Dunk Contest.
Sí.
At the time, he was only a few months into his NBA career, but MJ already had millions of fans in the palm of his hand. Michael was the future, and everyone knew it. And to pay homage to his childhood idol Julius Erving, Michael pulled off a dunk that would inevitably become his trademark. A dunk from the free throw line. And on his very first attempt,
Vaya matazo, ¿eh? ¿Y eso que era en su primer año? Bueno, sí, en su primer año siendo rookie.
An incredible, gravity-defying dunk. Fans were amazed. Judges were impressed.
Eso es un fotón. Lo que sale ahí, hay una foto que desde eso y es un fotón que flipas. Luego hizo otro que es cuando hizo como un rectificado o algo así. Y ese también estuvo guapo, ¿eh?
And Michael Jordan came in second. And he took that personally.
Quedó segundo.
So 2 years later, in 1987, Michael Jordan made his return to the dunk contest, and this time, he put it all on the table. With one of the greatest dunk contest performances in NBA history, MJ went home as the NBA Dunk Contest champion.
A ver, sí, estuvo guapo. Yo he visto ese concurso de mates, hemos visto los que hayamos visto el vídeo y tal. Pero yo creo que como el de Vince Carter y mejor aún el de Aaron Gordon y Zach LaVine, yo creo que no ha habido ninguno. Me da igual que haya estado Jordan, me da igual quién haya estado. Como no sé cuál de vosotros os gustará más, decídmelo en los comentarios. El de Aaron Gordon o LaVine o el de Vince Carter. No sé yo,
Not before pulling off arguably the most iconic dunk in basketball history.
De tiro libre con rectificado. ¿Ves? Con rectificado.
Another free throw line dunk. But this wasn't like any that came before it. To this day, when most players do free throw line dunks, they really have to reach and strain themselves to get the ball to the hoop. But what MJ did in 87 was graceful. It was effortless.
Mira.
Man was literally floating. When fans saw this dunk, they no longer thought MJ was some sort of basketball sorcerer who figured out how to levitate in midair.
Mira, tío, es que levitaba el cabrón,
Time was and still is like nothing else we've ever seen. The man's ability to just hang in the air was almost too.
O sea, es que ahora estamos viendo jugadores, Ja Morant, hemos visto a Derrick Rose, hemos visto jugadores que saltan un montón. Pero es que Jordan, tío, se mantenía en el aire. O sea, es que saltaba y era como, bueno, pues ya bajaré. En algún momento tengo que bajar, pero no me apetece que sea ahora, será un poquito más tarde. Y yo estoy en el aire, ahí. Es como, tío, ¿quieres hacer el favor de bajar como los seres humanos normales y corrientes?
And that's because it wasn't true. Not the jumping part, but the hanging part. Because contrary to popular belief,
¿Cómo que era
it is
mentira?
impossible for an athlete to hang in midair, even for a fraction of a second. The concept of an athlete's hang time is a myth. Back in 2007,
¿Cómo que es un mito que se queda en el aire?
a show called Sports Science paired up with former NBA player Jordan Farmar to test the theory of hang time. At the time, Jordan had a vertical leap of 42 inches, and they put this vertical to the test by attaching trackers to his body and pressure-sensitive insoles into his shoes to measure his jumps.
Vale.
What they found was that no matter where he jumped from, no matter how high he jumped, and no matter how he maneuvered his body in the air, his ascent was always exactly the same amount of time as his descent, with no pause or stall or hang time in between. When you see a player who seems to be hanging in midair, what you're really seeing is actually a bit of an illusion.
While mid-flight
¿En serio? Bueno.
body contortions cannot affect their overall flight.
A ver, la gravedad está, hay que tener en cuenta que la gravedad está ahí.
When elite players like Michael Jordan begin their descent, their body stretches, which keeps their head moving horizontally for an extra split second.
Ah, claro, el cuerpo está bajando, pero tiran la espalda así para atrás. Y entonces parece que siguen estando en la misma posición, pero en realidad están bajando. Cabrones, Jordan, qué callado te lo tenías,
This creates the optical illusion of prolonged hang time.
Now, I cannot begin to tell you how devastated I was when I watched this episode of Sports Science as a kid.
La verdad es que esto es terrible, O sea, esto te quita la inocencia en un momento,
Unbelievable. Next thing you know, someone's gonna tell me Michael Jordan didn't actually stretch out his arm 25 feet to score a last-second bucket to defeat the Monstars.
¿Cómo? Perdón, que no lo hizo de verdad. ¿En serio me está diciendo que no hizo eso? No, eso sí que no, eso sí que lo hizo, ¿verdad? Lo hizo, ¿no?
So, as great as this dunk was, it wasn't great enough to defy the laws of physics, and the concept of hang time was all just a myth. just like many other narratives and concepts within the NBA that we've been led to believe for years.
A ver, ¿qué más cositas hay?
Today's video is sponsored by Keeps.
No, hombre, no, publicidad no, Jimmy. A ver, yo sé que tienes que comer, pero hijo.
Throughout the 75-year history of the NBA, there have been some incredible stories. Stuff that is so incredible that it sounds
Spoonweb,
mythical. And that's because it is. When an old tale or an exaggerated recollection of events takes hold within NBA fandom, it virtually becomes a matter of fact.
Aquí te digo, en este vídeo vamos a perder la inocencia, porque si nos van a empezar a desmontar mitos de la NBA...
Now, growing up, years ago, it was just a matter of fact that Larry Bird was the greatest three-point shooter of all time. We all knew it, and we'd all heard the stories from those who watched the man play. I mean, the dude won 3 straight three-point contests, including one where he didn't even take his warm-up off. And to this day, some fans will attest that Larry Bird is still one of the greatest three-point shooters of all time.
Bueno, eso ya sabemos que no es.
Top 3: Steph, Ray Allen, and Larry Bird. But this, my friends, is a myth. For his time, Larry Bird was an excellent three-point shooter.
No, pero estaba Reggie Miller, ¿no?
35 years, and there have been dozens and dozens of players who have surpassed Bird in his shooting. Check this out. Here's a chart of the best three-point shooters of all time. The further right a player is, the more efficient.
Mira, o sea, esta es una tabla de los mejores tiradores de triple de todos los tiempos. Y ves aquí, pues, Klay Thompson, Buddy Hield, Damian Lillard, James Harden, Eric Gordon, Paul George, Ray Allen, CJ McCollum, Joe Harris. Vas viendo por aquí. Y aquí arriba del todo... aquí arriba del todo... Está Stephen Curry. Y esto es una media entre los triples por partido y el porcentaje que tienen en su carrera, ¿no? Y aquí está Stephen Curry con 3,8 por partido y un 42 y algo por ciento de triple. Míralo, aquí arriba está.
And the higher up, the more threes that player made each game. All the way at the top is, of course, Stephen Curry on his own planet. And then you have Klay Thompson, Buddy Hield, Damian Lillard, James Harden. This list includes hundreds of players since the three-point line was added to the NBA.
Sí.
And all the way down here is Larry Bird.
¡Hostias! Larry Bird está... que metía como mucho un triple por partido y estaba entre un 37 y un 38% de triples, ¿eh? ¡Guau! La flipas, ¿eh?
Of course, Bird played in an era where players shot far less threes.
Eso es verdad, eso es verdad.
Time, he was one of the best long-range shooters.
Eso es verdad.
But times have changed.
Se tiraba menos, hay que decir que se tiraba menos. Y él tiraba, pero se tiraba menos.
Drastically. Sure, if Bird played in today's league, he would practice shooting more threes, he'd play in a system that valued the three-pointer more, and he would have simply shot more threes. But Larry Bird doesn't play in today's league, and just based off the facts, there are countless players that are simply better three-point shooters than Bird was. Now, this next myth is one that has ran rampant over the last few years, and quite frankly, I'm sick of it. Every offseason, NBA fans all over social media lose their minds over Instagram and Twitter videos of NBA players who've improved their game, specifically their shooting.
Esto dicen... Esto yo creo que es una teoría... Lo voy a decir... Yo creo que va a decir eso, lo que creo que va a decir, ¿eh? Yo creo que lo que dice es que lo que hacen muchos jugadores es... sacan clips interesantes, aposta para ganar mejores contratos.
Every summer, clips of NBA players now...
Yo de verdad tengo que decirlo y creo que todos estamos de acuerdo. Puede ser que toda la comunidad de baloncesto estemos hartos ya, pero completamente hartos de los vídeos de Carmelo Anthony en el mismo campo, siempre tirando y que parece que va a ser la próxima superestrella. Cada verano hay vídeos de Carmelo Anthony entrenando y diciendo, guau, Carmelo está preparadísimo para la siguiente temporada. Y luego no hace una mierda. Yo creo que estamos todos de acuerdo en esto, ¿eh? Creo que aquí no hay... nadie que esté en contra. Todo el mundo estamos en la misma. Qué pesado eres, Carmelo. Si vas a subir un vídeo diciendo que vas a ilusionar a la gente, hazlo, pero no desilusiones para nada.
Going berserk in a training session go viral, and immediately fans believe these players have revolutionized their entire game. If I have to watch one more video of Ben Simmons sinking 8 straight three-pointers in an empty gym and then reading comments about how he's got a three-point shot now, I think I'm gonna...
Otro que tal, Ben Simmons metido triples.
Season videos first began to surface a few years ago, some of these guys had me fooled. Andre Drummond's got his free throws down, some player added 15 pounds of muscle in the offseason and their game has completely transformed. Ben Simmons can now shoot the three ball. You want to know why Ben Simmons is drilling threes like he's Stephen Curry's long-lost brother in these off-season clips? Because he's in an empty gym with zero pressure and piss-poor defense or literally no defense on him at all. 99% of NBA players knock down damn near every shot they take in practice. They are all automatic in open runs against players you've never heard of.
Eso es verdad.
Time and time again, we are shown that these off-season clips do not translate to the NBA season.
Eso es verdad,
Lonzo
eso es
Ball
verdad.
may be the only player in recent history to actually vastly improve his shot over the course of
Es verdad, Lonzo sí que se vio este clip de que había cambiado su mecánica y efectivamente la cambió.
one offseason. We have got to stop taking these off-season clips so seriously. It's just practice. Every NBA player looks like a god when they're getting open shots up. And no, Ben Simmons cannot shoot the three despite the 30-second shooting clinic he posted on his Instagram. Now, the average height of an NBA player is 6'7" tall, which is really, really tall. In fact, the average NBA player
6'7", son 2 metros uno.
taller than 99.99% of all males in the United States. That means, on average, if you gathered 1,000 random men, odds are only one of them will be as tall as the average NBA player.
Uno de cada 1000 hombres en los Estados Unidos son igual de altos que el jugador NBA promedio.
It kind of blows my mind when people say you don't need to be tall to play in the NBA. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a myth. Take me, for example. I'm 6'1", and being around basketball my entire life, I've never considered myself to be tall by any stretch of the imagination. But generally speaking, I'm still taller than about 93% of men within the United States.
Eso es
Now,
verdad.
out of the 590 players currently active in the NBA, take a wild guess at how many of them are my height or shorter. 40.
Bueno, 40% de la NBA miden 6'1", 5'11", o sea, un 80, 86, 88. A ver, ¿qué pasa? Yo no lo veo mal, ¿eh? A mí esto me parece un mito de mierda. O sea, esto de que digan que es falso, de que la altura es importante para la NBA, a ver, es importante en una parte, por supuesto, pero yo creo que hay cosas más importantes todavía.
There are 40 players in the entire NBA that are 6 feet 1 inches tall or shorter, which means I quickly go from being taller than about 93% of men in the general population to taller than just 2% of players in the NBA. But it gets worse, because the average height for a male in the US is 5'9", which means that an average sized man would literally be the shortest player in the NBA. But he wouldn't
Facundo Campacho es el jugador más bajito de la NBA, ¿eh?
be the shortest player in NBA history. Of the 3,500 players to ever play a game in the modern NBA, only 11 of them were 5'9" or shorter. That's 0.3%, less than half of 1% of all NBA players since 1977 have been average in stature. Look at how minuscule Nate Robinson looks against most NBA players.
Hombre, claro, es que no me jodas, claro.
This is what an average guy would
Pues mira lo
look
que
like
hacía.
in the NBA.
Mira lo que
As
hacía.
if the astronomical chances of making it to the league weren't difficult enough, not being tall makes this immense goal next to impossible. So yes, you do need to be tall to play in the NBA. Well, either that or be an absolute anomaly of an athlete.
Claro, ahí está la cosa, que si no eres alto, pues no pasa nada, pero tienes que tener otras virtudes. ¿Que ser alto ayuda? Por supuesto, pero tienes que tener otras virtudes, por supuesto. Pero yo creo que esto de decir, no, si no eres alto, no puedes ir a la NBA, mentira.
Except Michael Jordan wasn't only a freak athlete, he was also 6'6", a combination of attributes and physical gifts that eventually made him the greatest basketball player of all time. And decades after Jordan's retirement from the game, his legend continues to grow. The man went 6-0 in the finals throughout his career, but many say that if he didn't retire the first time in 1993, Michael and the Bulls would have won 8 straight championships. But this is a massive myth. You see,
Ojo, dicen que si Jordan, a ver esto, que si Jordan no se hubiera retirado la primera vez, hubieran ganado en vez de 6, 8 títulos, hubiera ganado 2 títulos más.
because Jordan did lose in the playoffs to the Orlando Magic. Not in the finals, not in the conference finals, but in the second round of the playoffs. So there's really no need to theorize if the Bulls would have won 8 straight titles, since we literally saw Michael and the Bulls lose right in the middle of their decade-long run. And I know what some of you are thinking.
Claro, era imposible, ¿verdad? Porque sí, aquí este año estuvo jugando, claro, y este año, cuando volvió, que ya con el 45, bueno, en 45 unos partidos solo, perdió. Entonces, claro, era imposible, no hubiera ganado. La gente que dice, claro, que si Jordan no se hubiera retirado, hubiera ganado más títulos. No, a ver, el primero está claro que no, pero el segundo perdió, entonces era imposible.
When Michael returned to the NBA in 1995, he wasn't in basketball shape, and he didn't have enough time to get reacclimated to playing basketball by the time the playoffs came around.
Hostia, vaya piedra tirado ahí,
Some truth to this, I'd be more inclined to agree if MJ didn't average 31, 7, and 5 a game against Orlando in that series. In fact, MJ had better numbers in the playoffs right after his return in 1995 than he had in the following season after being back for a season and a half.
¿Cómo?
Then he had in the
O sea, tuvo mejores números cuando volvió del retiro que cuando estuvo en su mejor época.
following season after being back for a season and a half. People act like he was a shell of himself in his return, when in reality he was about 95% himself in those playoffs. The truth is, after losing Horace Grant in the 94 offseason, the Bulls struggled against teams with prolific big men. And when the Bulls met a prime Shaquille O'Neal and the Magic in the playoffs, this weakness was put on full display in a 6-game series.
Penny Hardaway, qué bueno era,
If the Bulls made it past Orlando, they would have had to go through the Knicks, who were just as deep in the front court. And eventually, they would have had to face the Rockets, who were the most
O sea, primero tuvieron que enfrentarse a los Orlando. Después de Orlando, si hubieran ganado, hubieran tenido que jugar contra los Knicks, que tenían a Ewing, a Patrick Ewing. Y después tenían que enfrentarse a los Rockets, que tenían a Olajuwon.
With one of the greatest big men of all time. Even if the Bulls had Michael in 94 and the entirety of the 95 season,
Y sin Grant.
roster to outmatch some of the other teams at the time. Not to mention that time and time again, we are shown that winning multiple championships in a row has massive effects on teams. Between injuries, contracts, and player retention, winning championships isn't as simple as just having
Que se lo digan a los Warriors, que ahora no pueden mantener a todos.
The Warriors assembled the damn Justice League for a few seasons, and they still couldn't win 3 in a row. Kobe and Shaq were the best duo in league history, but after three-peating, they just couldn't replicate the magic they once had. I'd even go as far as saying Michael Jordan retiring in 93 was the best thing he could have done for his legacy. By the time he came back, he was rejuvenated, he was motivated, and the Bulls had made the necessary offseason moves to make them the overwhelming favorite again. So, the next time you hear a crazy story or some stat that sounds too good to be true, it's probably because it isn't true. When a player reaches greatness, he becomes the man, the myth, and the legend. You just gotta know which is which. Hope you all enjoyed. And as always, until next time.
Nos vemos, Jimmy. Muchas gracias por todo. Oye, pues me ha dejado un poco tocado este vídeo, mentalmente. Me ha dejado bastante tocado la vida del vídeo este, O sea, Jordan era una mentira. No, a ver, obviamente hay que apreciar eso, pero que fue casualidad. O sea, es muy probable que en los años que estuvo retirado, si no se hubiera retirado, no hubiera ganado. Y en lugar de 6-0 hubiera hecho un 6-2. O no hubiera llegado ni a las finales. Me ha dejado un poco tocado este vídeo. Pero bueno, espero que te haya gustado. Ya sabes, suscríbete al canal. También suscríbete al canal principal, que estamos ahí para esos 300.000. Te lo dejo todo en la descripción. Deja tu like si te ha gustado el vídeo y nos vemos en el siguiente. ¡Adiós!